I've been loving your stuff online. I've just been looking at it again just now. I mean, you're in the middle of a really lovely, juicy project.
We are at the moment, Derek. Yeah, I'm doing a church window at the minute, which is due for unveiling in August, middle of August, which is fantastic. But it's all set for the 15th of August, and the bishop's coming to bless the window and all that stuff. So there is no slippage. But I mean, it's lovely, and I've been working on it probably now for over a year, from the design and the concept and the whole thing all the way through, and sort of working on it physically since really about sort of February. And you know what it's like when you get something like that, that you're going in every day and you're just doing a piece and another bit and another bit, and you're starting to see it come to fruition. It's lovely
Yeah.
to have that sort of concentrated time on one thing. So I'm really enjoying it.
I've been following it with great interest. I mean, the start as well, when you were drawing out the design on the floor with a long stick. I love that. You know, you're just standing there, kind of like getting these lovely kind of lyrical lines, drawing with your whole arm. That was brilliant.
Yeah, yeah, because it was, I mean, you've been to the studio and I don't have a big wall space. So in order to kind of like get a bit of distance from it, I had to put it out on the floor. And then, that was a technique obviously that we were taught at art school, that whole thing about standing back from your board and drawing at a distance, and how it changes the perspective, and that whole, and the touch of the stick and the charcoal, it makes a different kind of mark. So I loved that, and yeah, that was really. I was channeling my inner Matisse
I'm gonna take a
sitting
leaf
in
out of
bed.
your book on that because I do it the stupid way, which is basically on my hands and knees with a cushion to protect my bloody knees and drawing close up to it and then standing back, and it's just murder on the legs. So if that idea of standing and just because the quality of the line's completely different, isn't it? It's a much freer line when you're drawing at a distance.
It is, and you can kind of feel from your shoulder, from your brain to your arm, through the stick to the charcoal onto the paper. There's a kind of line, and it just, it flows. It's a really lovely way to draw. I love it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. When you're teaching painting to people and you're doing it on a little light pad, I keep saying to them, look, this is not the way we normally do it. You normally stand up. It's on an easel, and you're drawing with your shoulder and your arm, and you're using your whole arm to make gestural marks.
I know, and I think that the line, the kind of quality of line that you get doing it that way, is that because there is that slight, you don't have that tight control, as you say, when you're close up and you've got your pencil. So there's the kind of, even the sort of bowing of the stick, and how it kind of affects the line. It gives it a little character, a little bit of movement, it gives it a quality that's really lovely.
I found that the case with a drawing class that I went to ages ago, where normally we have life drawing classes down here, and they're normally not tutored, but this one was a tutored one, and the tutor came in with broken sticks that he just picked up on his walk in, and we had all little sort of ink wells of Indian ink, so we had like a broken stick, and he said draw with those, and it was so liberating because the line was a much more organic, free line, and I loved it, and it allows you to just loosen up. You're not trying to be detailed. It kind of changes your mindset a little bit as well, doesn't it?
Completely. You'll get marks, a quality of mark making that you would never get if it's kind of predetermined, and you're kind of conscious about, this is what I want to do, because things slip and they skate off the page and they kind of go, and that gives the drawing something else, which is, I love, I totally, and I agree. I'm going to, like, I've done it for my patterns, but it's got me into the whole idea of doing some more drawing in that way, just to kind of draw other things, like to get that quality of mark making.
Yeah, well, I'd only really seen it on the sort of the great master, images of the great masters, as you say, drawing in their studios. It's sort of turn of the century stuff, and I saw you doing it again, and I thought that's brilliant. That's the way to go. So, are you on schedule with this big project? Are you on schedule, do
Yeah.
you reckon?
Yeah, I'm on schedule. I'm down this week and next week. I'm into the kind of engineering bit. So as much as the glass is still going in the background, the kilns are on every day. I'm doing I've got to put in metal supports, steel joists, all this kind of metal work. So that I've got a metal company now that are making the bits and pieces. So this week it will be the technical bit. to kind of, the housing for the whole window. And then the glass is just going to, I'll probably be starting to kind of glaze in about 2 weeks' time. And then I will hit the deadline. I've got no choice. I've got to do it.
You've got to do it. The bishop's coming.
The bishop's coming. So
He's not going to forgive you.
no, no. And also, it's the reason he's coming. It's, the window is called the Dormition of Mary, and that's a quite an unusual for kind of Western art. It's quite unusual. It's basically the assumption when Mary sort of, the Virgin Mary dies and she's taken up into heaven. All the images that we see in Western art of her in the sky and the clouds and the angels are taking her up and she's in glory. The Dormition is basically the image of Our Lady asleep. So she's just basically passed away and she's asleep and she's taken up asleep. So that's the difference. And it's more common in kind of Russian Orthodox imagery.
Greek Orthodox and the Russian Orthodox thing.
Yeah. It's more common in that. So I've kind of been doing my research through those channels. But the 15th of August is the feast day of the Our Lady's Assumption. So that's why there's no slip on it.
It has to go. It has to be in.
Even the bishop, he's not having a say in it because that's the feast day is the 15th. So that's when it's going to be unveiled.
Wow. And do you get people round to have a look at work in progress, or is it all kind of like kept secret until you get it in? How do you work?
There's been a few people that have seen some of the work in progress. There's a few kind of friends and sort of colleagues who are they know that I'm working on it, and sometimes they'll come in the gallery and kind of have a sneak peek and all that. So I take them downstairs and let them see wee bits. There was a young chap got in touch, enthusiastic young lad about in his kind of early 20s, and his mum got in touch to say he's really interested. So I had him down to see some of the things been made, and he's fascinated. He wants to go into the whole, he wants to do glass, and he's just been completely inspired by the whole thing. He came the day the drawing when I was doing those drawings on the ground. He came that day and he was kind of puzzled at first, saying, "What are you doing?" And I explained, and then that opened up. He goes, "Oh wow, this is cool." So a few people have had a wee sneak peek.
But doesn't that speak to the fact that, just showing the possibility for younger people who didn't realize it was even a thing to see, an artist in his studio or her studio working can just spark something that they didn't know they needed or wanted until they see it. It's so important, isn't it, to be able to kind of show people that how you do this and how you work. I must ask you, while we're on this topic of this is a lovely project to do. What's your favorite part of a project like this?
I think when the glass is kind of the stage when the glass is fired. And what I basically do is you've seen my bench. It's Douglas's old bench, and there's all these drawers in it. So I'm sort of basically firing sections and put them in the drawer, firing and putting them in the drawer. So very soon the moment's going to come when I open all the drawers and I take it and I start to put it up and sort of put it together. And that's always the bit where the kind of excitement starts, because it's like you're working in small sections and small sections and small sections, and then all of a sudden you bring the stuff out and you start to put it like a jigsaw together, and you think, right, and things that I've painted 2 months ago I'm going to bring back out that I haven't seen for all that time. And that's the nice bit, because that's the kind of fine tuning bit where you kind of go, right, I need to do another wee bit, or I need to just adjust and balance this thing. Yeah. So I think that's my favorite bit because at that point I'm beginning to see the finished thing almost before it's made.
It becomes real then, doesn't it? Because before that you're dealing with designs and you're imagining it based on like sketches and then you actually see the material and the color balance and the vividness of the glass. And yeah, it's a wonderful time, isn't it? When you actually, and also leading it and holding, once you've leaded one side and soldered it and you turn that up and see it kind
I
of
know.
in the light, that's a beautiful moment as well, isn't it?
Absolutely, Derek. That's at that point it's becoming it's transferred from the sketchbooks into the actual reality, and you're kind of you can go back to your sketchbooks and look, but you see how it's changed and how the marks that weren't in the sketchbook that can't be there that happen when you're painting and you're doing it happen.
Yeah.
One other bit that's been lovely was the glass selection, because
Oh my goodness.
I was able to go to Sue Bradbury's studio in Kilmore's. Sue's retired now, but she has got the most incredible collection of antique Hartley wood glass. It's a lifetime's collection, and she very kindly agreed to let me buy some of the glass. So these are sheets of glass from way back in her past, and I was able to go down, go through the racks, choose all these amazing sheets of glass, sort of dated from the 70s and 80s, and
Unbelievable. And that single sheet of gold pink, is that Hartley Woods gold pink or Lambert's gold pink?
that's Lambert's, Derek,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I've got 4 of them, which is like, I had to go and collect those from, stained glass supplies in Glasgow, and, it was the most nerve-wracking journey home. The 4 of them, back of the van, every
Mortgage the house in order to get them as well, my
no,
God.
but the most beautiful, beautiful glass, just,
Yeah.
so it was a joy taking those out and beginning to start cutting them was lovely.
Fantastic. Sue Bradbury used to have a studio in Irvine, didn't she, for a long time? She had a church. Was she working in home from, is that
Yeah,
right?
she's still, it's her home. It's, an old church. It's in just outside, sort of Kilmarnock, Irvine area, in a wee place called Kilmores, and she's still there, and it's beautiful. She lives up in the upper part of the church, and then her studio's downstairs, and she's still making things and still working.
Fantastic.
The glass collection, and, funnily enough, on the subject of Brian Clarke,
Yeah.
dear Brian, he got in touch with Sue last year because he knew she had probably one of the largest collections of Hartleywood glass still available, and there was a transaction kind of in the offing, which obviously, won't be happening now, which is so sad. She had been speaking to Brian's assistant, and they'd been in touch, because she's still got, a lot of these old clear CDs and whites, and this,
Oh
a lot of
my goodness. That's a
I know.
priceless collection. That's priceless.
Yeah, yeah, and I think, when when Sue had kind of like, when they were in contact, and Sue had said, "I've got, X amount," I think obviously his interest was piqued, and he was like, "Well, would you be interested in selling it?" And they were in this, there was a, they were chatting about it, and obviously that's, it won't happen now, sadly.
So how did you hear about the death of Brian Clarke?
It was very strange, Derek. On Friday night, I was on my laptop and I was doing the usual, looking at bits and pieces, and this thing popped up saying Brian Clarke. It was an American glass artist that I'm friends with. They said, "Really sad to hear about, the passing of Brian Clarke." And I stopped in my tracks, and I thought, no, this happened. And, I went on the guy's kind of like messages, and 2 messages down, another message said, "No, no, it's not that Brian Clarke. Another Brian Clarke artist passed away last week, who was a jeweler, and somebody who it was of a similar age." So I went, "Wow, gee whiz, thank goodness for that." And I kind of thought that it's one of these things that's happened. It's just been the names have been mixed up, forgot about it. And then on Saturday, when I woke up on Saturday morning, Lou had been Googling and looking at things, because she normally gets up earlier, and she normally looks at the news and bits and pieces. And when I came up and, came into the sort of kitchen, she said, "Oh, really sad news. Brian Clarke passed away." So it was obviously real news, and I was just stunned, absolutely stunned.
I was the same. I saw it on a post actually from Petri Anderson, and I thought I didn't think it was real. I thought somebody had kind of like faked it or something. And I messaged, similar to you, I messaged Petri and said, "Petri, you've just put up a post saying Brian Clark's died." Because I couldn't believe it either. It just seems like a shock from an absolute shock out of the blue kind of thing to have happened. And he said, "Oh yeah, but the Washerwood Company of Glaziers put out an email earlier on that evening, about 6 o'clock in the evening, to say that he'd passed." And so, yeah, it's just, I mean, I was genuinely moved and saddened by that. I kind of felt that, I mean, we've had a few days to kind of process it now, but I felt immediately that how a light had been extinguished. I don't know if you felt the same way.
Absolutely, Derek. I felt, it's funny because the other big part of my life is music, and recently Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys sort of passed away. And the last sort of couple of weeks, I've been talking to musician sort of friends, and we were kind of talking about that thing about sort of, these are our heroes, the generation that are our heroes musically, artistically, are now passing on. And we were talking about it in the context of Brian Wilson. I never for a million years thought it would, it would sort of relate to the sort of stained glass world. So when I heard, thought, I mean, that this is he's the first. kind of hero, mass hero, if you like, of the modern age, and for people of our age, that grew up as students looking at the work. I think for that reason, it made it all the more devastating because it was like literally, and also on the back of his kind of recent success in the exhibition in London a couple of years ago, the big recent commission in Bahrain, and I just thought he's at the top of his game. He's really, at the moment, he's at a peak right now, and I thought this is actually tragic that this massive creativity has just stopped and it like that.
I think it's hard to kind of put into words how much of a North Star he was for generations of glass artists, especially of our vintage who were going through the art school system, maybe in the 80s, even into the 90s. He was just this North Star. And even although you may not have, I saw very few artists designing in the same way that he would design, but he was still a massive influence. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was completely unique. It had a unique voice at a time when, probably the kind of what was the norm in terms of kind of British glass designers was to follow that more traditional kind of Gothic style of glass painting and figurative work and the stuff that we all that we know to I think to be as bold and graphic and as abstract an idea but in a kind of graphic way and using grids and kind of breaking away from that tradition of what the kind of post-war British tradition was, I thought was incredibly brave and really visionary. I mean, because it was through looking at his work that I started to understand the German glass artists. Only by looking at Clark's work was I able to then go back and see that influence of post-war German artists, Schreiter, Schaffrath, all those people, and really look at that sort of modern glass, which is what it was, and that's what made it was so ahead of everything. That's what it always felt like to me. It just felt as if it was like 3 or 4 steps ahead of what everybody else was doing.
I completely agree. I felt that quite profoundly. I went down to see a show of his. It was quite a small show down in Cork Street or something. And that was the first time I saw his hyper colorful grids system. He was making sample panels, I think, for the Leeds shopping centre. That big sort of atrium shopping centre thing with a whole lot of grids, very highly colored blues and orange, opposite colors together. I'd
Yeah.
never seen that before. And it was, you talked about the word bravery and being ahead of the game. He was light years ahead of anybody else who was using that color palette turned up to 11. I hadn't seen anybody else using that color palette. I don't know how he developed it, but he had sort of arrived with this fully formed high color palette, which he then used subsequently, for the rest of his life. If you look at his early work, it's slightly more muted, and but then it became this very high color palette, and he was doing it long before anybody else was. And I think that idea of him being that North Star, and you don't necessarily have to like everything that he does, but you paid attention to what he did because he was
Yeah.
he was kind of like reinventing what it could possibly be, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think so, Derek. I think the color obviously became more intense as he went on, and I loved a lot of his early work. I loved a lot of that kind of the stuff that he was kind of doing in the almost in the punk era. His little collages that were then translated into glass, where you've got things like safety pins on collages, and that kind of the punk ethos, which is what he was kind of channeling, because at that time, creatively, artistically, he was doing with glass what the musicians were doing with music. He was breaking out of the kind of straitjacket of the kind of conventional artist and doing this really modern, really using grids and squares and interrupting these kind of grids with amorphic forms. They would kind of sort of interrupting the rhythm,
Yeah.
and the whole thing was just really, for me, it was massively exciting, and I'd never seen anything like it. Like, there was nothing like it before or since. It really is. It's work that will stand the test of time because it's so unique.
Yeah, I mean, that he was. I remember you said on one of your posts, your first sort of post reaction to it was he was the reason you got into stained glass, and he was the reason that I got into stained glass. You know, I kind of didn't really conceive of it as being something that you could do in a contemporary way. And I saw his book Architectural Stained Glass on the bookshelf in the library at the art school, and it just blew me away. I just thought, my God, you know, you can literally do anything in glass. And he kind of like opened up, he just broadened the vista of possibilities of what you can do with glass in a way that nobody else had done.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The same thing. It was a book that kind of brought him to my attention. The original Andrew Moore architectural stained glass book, which I was in a secondhand bookshop in Greenock, and a guy who was an old mate was working there, and he handed me the copy of the book, and it was the original hardback copy, which has the Buxton Mall from Derbyshire. You know,
Yeah.
the blue cover with those sort of yellow sort of amorphic shapes. And I remember looking at the cover first of all and going, "What is that?" You know,
Yeah.
at first I thought it was a graphic, because similar to you, when I went to art school, I wanted to do graphic design, and I had this whole kind of graphic mind going on. And when I saw that, I thought, "What is that?" And then, of course, I looked inside, and it was like the color and the whole everything just it changed from that moment because I thought, "You can do this in glass. This is glass. You know, this is stained glass, not what I thought was stained glass. This is something else. This is completely modern, completely unique." And then I then sort of started to research. And of those days, there was obviously no internet or anything. You had to find books and libraries and that kind of thing. But what I did find was that he had been linked with Paul McCartney and the Paul McCartney's Tug of War album from 1982. The front cover, designed by Brian Clarke. It's a kind of collage of McCartney's a photograph, and then he's surrounded by this Clarke grid. And when I went back and looked at that and thought, this is that guy, and that just made him even cooler because he was involved with people, musicians and designing stage sets as well as glass. And I just thought this guy's like a renaissance man. He really he's kind of he's everything. There's nothing he won't touch.
I think also, I was struck by the fact going to see A Great Light at the Damien Hirst gallery in 2023 that we're not really going to see his likes again. But the ability to kind of produce a show on that scale to be as awe-inspiring and inspirational. You know, there's not that many people who could do a show like that. What was your response when you went down to see that show?
I completely agree, Derek. I think it was quite I found it incredibly moving and almost, in a kind of very spiritual way. I thought that the kind of quality of the work and the way it was displayed, I thought was superb, especially the large screen, the large flare screen. That was it's just something that, when you stand in front of a Mark Rothko painting and you kind of fall into the color, you kind of, dissolve into it when you actually stand, which was kind of what the point was. It was the same thing with when I stood in front of that screen and just let it wash over me.
Yeah.
It was very, very moving. And you're right. I think the scale and the ambition of it. I mean, we as glass artists make windows and things, and on a scale that is sort of measured by sort of your ability and how much kind of like space you have, and the ambition of that work is way way beyond. And I think for that it was magical and very very inspiring. And I don't even think I mean when I went there, it was a kind of Monday morning. It was relatively quiet, but there were people in the gallery, and there were people who knew nothing about stained glass, just people visiting to see work. And I could hear them, standing next to them. You could hear them. They were bewildered by this whole kind of like, what is this? How can one person create this volume of work, this on this scale? It was astounding. Really, the man's ambition was just astonishing.
I tell you what I also found very moving is when you hear him talking about what glass, how it made him feel. I think if you are working in glass, you can resonate with that quality of glass, that falling into that talks about transluminescence and I mean, there's a whole. He's a very very eloquent. I can't even begin to be as eloquent as he was speaking about the effect that glass had on him. But I think as glass artists, we can recognize that. And that, I think that's what's so refreshing, is that his whole life he was chasing that same feeling that we're all chasing, of like those moments, and they're quite rare. They don't happen often, where you just fall into a piece of work and you, as you said with like Rothko paintings, you just let it wash over you. It happens a few times in your life, but he was always trying to kind of reproduce that feeling, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think so, Derek. I mean, like, in sort of, in preparation for our chat, I went through some of my books. Like yourself, I've got a number of Brian Clarke books, and when you kind of go through the books and you see the kind of how much work he produced on a world scale, it's not a domestic thing. It's projects in Italy, in Japan, in America, in the Middle East, all countries, and they're all of a scale that is just hugely impressive. And I think the fact that the top architects of the world trusted him to basically add that little final sort of colorful sort of to the buildings that they had built says so much. He was massively trusted by Zaha Hadid and so many others that just basically knew that they were in safe hands when it came to Brian Clarke.
Yeah, fabulous, fabulous. Yeah, I mean, you get to the point where you sort of run out of words, because it's more. I think he was just the pioneer. He was just somebody that we looked to. He was so inspirational and so ahead of his time and so prolific. He was constantly working. You look at the publications, but not only that, but the exhibitions that he organized, and the projects that were all working concurrently, and the scale of the projects. It's just, it beggars belief that he was that prolific, but he was. He just, throughout his whole life, he was able to produce work at scale and with that kind of consistency of quality, which, again, I just don't think we're going to see his likes again for a while.
No, no, and I think one of the things that I loved about the show in London was I thought it was lovely that the series of works that he kind of referenced his mother, and those more personal things, because I think it's very easy to kind of think on his work in terms of sort of these massive buildings, airport buildings, and huge structures. But so I thought that he's engaged in doing all of that and working on that kind of grand scale, but somewhere along the line, he was also taking time to make more personal pieces of work. And those lead panels, those ones, those sort of amazing lead sheets with the glass kind of like, sort of punching through, this kind of skull motif, references to his mother, the handwritten sort of note with her shopping list and all that kind of stuff. So, he obviously was still pushing that idea of developing his own personal kind of like voice and making those personal pieces, and not just these huge projects, that we all admire and we're sort of in awe of. There was still a kind of part of him that dedicated that sort of part of his kind of personal journey to making new pieces of work, and that was really moving as well, I thought.
Yeah. Alex, so thanks so much for giving me your feedback on this. I feel that for the next generations of creatives who are out there who may not have known Brian Clarke, it's important to kind of just put a mark in the sand as to how important he was to generations of glass artists. Yeah.
Absolutely. He's the great pioneer, and he's inspired many, many, many artists. And his work is now there. It's out in the world, and it'll inspire people for generations going forward as well. So for that, we're blessed to have that work in the world.